I sat in the waiting room of the Cobalt Tower, the leather chair cold against my bare legs. My portfolio rested on my lap, heavy with 3 months of sleepless nights and the terrifying hope that the Aries project would save my boutique firm. The air conditioning hummed, aggressive and sterile, smelling faintly of expensive espresso and the sharp scent of anxiety. I smoothed the skirt of my dress, checking the time for the 3rd time in a minute. Then the double doors slid open. I expected a stranger. Instead, I saw Elise. The woman who taught me precision, broke my heart, and was now standing between me and survival. I walked into the boardroom, and the silence hit me harder than the view. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the city sprawl, a grid of gray and steel that looked small from 50 floors up. But the real intimidation was at the head of the table. Elise sat there, perfectly still, her silhouette cut sharp against the bright sky. She wore a suit that probably cost more than my first office, charcoal gray and tailored to a terrifying degree. On the polished mahogany table in front of her lay a sleek black notebook and a fountain pen she held like a weapon. No laptop, no clutter, just her. I set my materials down, reclaimed wood samples, sketches on textured paper, fabric swatches in warm ochres and deep greens. They looked chaotic next to her side of the table, which was a study in chrome, glass, and digital renderings displayed on a tablet. The contrast wasn't an accident. It was a war of philosophies. "Miss Vance," the client, Mr. Sterling said, gesturing to a seat. "We've heard Miss Thorne's proposal for a monolithic approach. We're eager to see your alternative." Elise didn't blink. Her gaze held mine, unflinching, cool as the glass behind her. It had been 5 years, but that look still had the power to make my pulse jump in my throat. I opened my portfolio, my fingers brushing the rough edge of the paper. "Architecture isn't just about the skyline," I began, my voice steadier than my hands. "It's about the people living inside the lines." I pitched the vision I believed in: warmth, community, spaces designed for human error and connection rather than just efficiency. I talked about light that moves with the day, about materials that age and gain character rather than just deteriorating. I felt passionate, alive in the description, but every time I glanced at Elise, I felt her dissecting me. She wasn't just listening to the pitch. She was analyzing the pause in my breath, the way I leaned forward, the specific cadence of my persuasion. She knew all my tells. She knew exactly when I was selling a dream and when I was hiding a flaw. I was explaining the atrium's natural ventilation system when she spoke. Her voice was low, clear, and cut through the room like a scalpel. "The wind shear at this altitude will create a tunneling effect in that atrium," she said, not even looking at her notes. "Your passive cooling calculations are off by 12%. You'll freeze the residents in the winter." The room went dead silent. Mr. Sterling looked at me, eyebrows raised. It was a devastating correction, delivered with the absolute authority of someone who never did the math wrong. My chest tightened. She was right. She was always right about the math. I took a slow breath, looking directly at her. "You're right about the shear," I admitted, refusing to look away. "If we were building a sealed box. But my design uses baffled intakes to disrupt that flow. It's not about blocking the wind, Elise. It's about using it." I turned to Sterling, leaning in. "Miss Thorne offers you a building that resists the environment. I'm offering you one that breathes with it. Perfection is static. Life is adaptable." Elise's pen stopped tapping against her notebook. For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Not annoyance, but recognition. A spark of the old dynamic, where her rigidity met my fluidity and created something neither of us could build alone. Mr. Sterling looked between us, sensing the electricity. He didn't know about the late nights in her loft, the wine spills on blueprints, the way she used to whisper corrections against my neck. He just saw 2 architects fighting for the soul of his building. "Interesting," he murmured, leaning back. "Very interesting." The meeting ended 10 minutes later. We packed up in silence. The air in the room was thick, charged with everything we hadn't said. As I gathered my wood samples, my hand brushed near hers on the table. The proximity sent a shock through me, a physical memory of her skin that had no place in this boardroom. She didn't pull away immediately. She just watched me, that cool, unreadable mask slipping for a fraction of a second before she snapped her notebook shut. The click echoed like a gunshot in the empty room. We didn't even make it to the elevators. Sterling's assistant caught us in the corridor, breathless and apologetic, ushering us back into the room we had just vacated. The air inside was still heavy with the residue of our conflict. Sterling was standing by the window now, looking out at the city grid that Elise loved and I tolerated. He turned as we entered, a look of calculated satisfaction on his face. "I don't want to choose," he said simply. He didn't offer us seats this time. "Miss Thorne, your structural logic is impeccable. It's safe, it's bankable, but Ms. Vance is right. It's cold." He looked at me. "And you, Ms. Vance, your vision has soul, but soul doesn't keep the rain out if the wind shear calculations are off." I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath my heels. I knew where this was going before he said it. "I want the Ares project to be a joint venture," Sterling announced. "Thorne's logistics, Vance's aesthetic. I want the precision and the life. Combine the proposals. If you can present a unified vision by Monday morning, the contract is yours. Both of yours." The silence that followed was absolute. My instinct was visceral and immediate. Run. This contract was supposed to be my liberation, the job that finally proved I didn't need the massive infrastructure of a firm like Elise's to succeed. Merging with her wasn't just a professional compromise. It was a surrender. It was stepping back into the shadow I had spent 5 years crawling out of. I opened my mouth to decline, to take my dignity and my chaotic wood samples back to my small studio. But the reality of my bank balance caught the words in my throat. I needed this. And looking at Elise, I realized she needed it too, though for different reasons. Her firm couldn't afford a public loss on a flagship project any more than I could afford bankruptcy. "Fine," Elise said, the word clipped and sharp. "We'll draft a preliminary merger of the designs." "Excellent." Sterling clapped his hands once, dismissing us. Walking out of that room felt like walking onto a ledge. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, sealing us in the corridor. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. We walked toward the elevators, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of our steps, but the tension was loud enough to ring in my ears. I pressed the call button and leaned against the wall, trying to put distance between us. It didn't work. Elise stood too close. She always stood too close, as if she were daring you to flinch. The scent of her hit me then, sandalwood, cold rain, and something expensive and subtle that I couldn't name, but remembered in my bones. It was the smell of her sheets on a Sunday morning, the smell of her neck when she leaned over my drafting table to correct a line. My body remembered it before my brain could put up a defense. "You're still messy," Elise said. Her voice was low, pitched for intimacy, even here in the hallway. I looked down. One of my fabric swatches was sticking out of my portfolio, a jagged edge of raw silk against her sleek leather case. "It's texture, Elise. Not everything has to be polished to death." "Your pitch was emotional," she continued, turning to face me. Her eyes swept over my face, analyzing, cataloging. "You play to the client's sentimentality because you don't trust your math." "I trust my math fine," I shot back, the anger finally finding its footing. "I just don't think a building should feel like a hospital. You design monuments, Elise. I design homes. That's why he wants us both." "He wants a unicorn," she corrected. "He wants something that doesn't exist." The elevator arrived with a soft chime, the doors sliding open to reveal an empty car. We stepped in, the mirrored walls reflecting our standoff. "Meet me at the site in an hour. If we're going to merge these disasters, I need to see the physical constraints before I look at your sketches." "Fine, 1 hour." She got off on the lobby floor without looking back, her stride purposeful, terrifyingly efficient. I watched her go, feeling the air leave the elevator with her. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking. I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the gray horizon. Why did we break up? The question that had haunted me for 5 years answered itself in the silence. It wasn't the work. It was the air. Elise needed to control the environment. Temperature, light, outcome. I needed to open the windows. She was a blueprint. I was a sketch. I started the engine. The sky above was bruising purple, a storm rolling in off the water. I merged into traffic, the city blurring past like a time-lapse video, driving straight back into the lion's den, because I couldn't afford to stay away. The airy site was less a building and more a wound in the earth, a skeleton of rusted rebar and gray concrete waiting for skin. By the time I parked, the wind was whipping through the exposed girders with a sound like a low, mournful cello note. It was raw, ugly, and honest. My favorite phase of construction, where the potential is still infinite and the mistakes haven't been poured in stone yet. Elise's black sedan was already there, gleaming incongruously against the mud and debris. She stood by the perimeter fence, looking up at the steel frame. Even in a hard hat and sight boots, she looked like she owned the skyline. Her coat was belted tight, a wool fortress against the elements. I approached, my boots squelching in the wet gravel, the sound heavy and wet. "It's going to pour," I said by way of greeting, pulling my collar up. "Then we better be efficient," she replied, not turning. She raised a gloved hand, pointing at the northwest corner where the steel rose highest. "The load-bearing columns there are too close to the intake. If you want your breathing building, you're going to have to sacrifice square footage on the executive floor. The structural load won't support the void you drew." "Or we cantilever the intake," I countered, stepping up beside her, forcing myself to look at the steel and not the sharp line of her jaw. "Push it out. Let it hang over the street. It creates a shadow line." "Risky," she said, finally turning to look at me. The wind caught a loose strand of her hair, the only part of her that dared to be messy. "Structurally expensive, logistically a nightmare. Visually stunning," I corrected. "And human." We started walking the perimeter. The wind picked up, carrying the sharp, metallic tang of wet iron and ozone. Elise moved through the industrial debris with a calculated grace I hated. She didn't stumble. She didn't look down. She just navigated the chaos of loose cables and uneven earth as if she had already mapped every hazard in her head. I, on the other hand, was fighting the terrain. My focus was on the sky, on the way the bruising purple light hit the steel, imagining the glass skin that didn't exist yet. I stepped onto a wooden plank, bridging a muddy trench, gesturing up at the atrium space. Imagine the light hitting that sheer wall at sunset. If we use the reclaimed copper panels, it won't just reflect. It will glow. It will feel warm. "Copper oxidizes," Elise said, her voice flat. "It stains the concrete below. It's messy. It's patina, Elise. It's time. It shows the building has lived." I turned to face her, passion rising in my throat. "You want to reinforce the core until nothing can move. You always do. You want everything locked down, immovable. But if you make it too rigid, it snaps in the wind. You know that. And if you make it too flexible, it collapses under its own weight," she shot back, her eyes flashing darker than the storm. "You call it freedom. I call it a lack of foundation. This building needs a spine, not a suggestion." "It needs a heart," I yelled over the rising wind. "You're building a cage and calling it a sanctuary." I took a step back to emphasize the point, and the plank shifted. It was a small movement, a slick of oil and mud underneath wet wood, but it was enough. My center of gravity pitched left. I flailed, reaching for a handrail that wasn't installed yet. I didn't hit the mud. A hand clamped around my bicep, firm and unyielding. Elise. She had moved faster than should have been possible, anchoring her weight and pulling me back to solid ground in one fluid motion. For a second, we froze. Her grip was tight, her fingers digging into my coat, pressing into the muscle beneath. It wasn't a casual assist. It was a claim. The touch burned, searing through layers of wool and denial to wake up nerve endings I thought I'd killed years ago. I looked up. Her face was inches from mine. The cool professional mask, cracked by a flash of genuine alarm. "Careful," she breathed. The word wasn't a reprimand. It was low, rough around the edges. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice lacked air. She didn't let go. Her thumb brushed the fabric of my sleeve, a microscopic caress that felt louder than the wind. "You never watch where you're stepping," she murmured. And suddenly we weren't talking about construction sites anymore. We were talking about the way I used to leap before looking, the way I dragged her into risks she wasn't ready for. "I watch where I'm going," I whispered, trapped in her gaze. "I just don't stare at the ground." "That's why you fall," she said. "That's why I fly," I countered. The tension between us was a physical weight, heavier than the humidity. Then the sky broke open. It wasn't a drizzle. It was a deluge, cold and sudden, soaking us in seconds. The spell snapped. "Trailer," Elise commanded, releasing me. We ran. The rain hammered against the metal roofs of the equipment sheds, deafening and violent. We scrambled up the metal steps of the site office, Elise shoving the door open and pulling me inside. She slammed it shut against the wind. The sudden silence was shocking. The roar of the storm was instantly muffled to a dull drumming on the roof. The trailer was small, smelling of stale coffee, blueprints, and damp wool. We stood there, chests heaving, dripping water onto the linoleum floor. The space was too small for two people with our history. The air instantly grew humid, thick with the scent of wet concrete and that distinct, maddening sandalwood perfume. Elise wiped rain from her cheek, her hair slightly disheveled for the first time in 5 years. She looked at me, her eyes dark, pupils dilated in the dim light. We were trapped in a metal box, the rest of the world washed away by gray rain, leaving only the impossible compromise of us. We needed neutral ground. The trailer was a cage of humidity and history, and the office was a battlefield. So we retreated to the Drake, a dimly lit, high-end hotel bar 3 blocks from the site. It was the kind of place that sold silence at a premium. Dark velvet banquettes, heavy crystal tumblers, and a jazz pianist playing something low and mournful in the corner. The transition from the raw, wet violence of the construction site to this hermetically sealed luxury was jarring. We were still damp, my hair frizzing at the temples, Elise's coat dark with rain at the shoulders. But here, the lighting forgave us. We slid into a booth in the back, the leather creaking under us. The distance across the small, round table felt infinitely smaller than the length of a boardroom table. Here, there were no schematics to hide behind, just the low hum of conversation and the weight of 5 years pressing against my chest. A waiter appeared, a shadow in a waistcoat. I opened my mouth to order, but Elise beat me to it. "A dry martini, twist, no olives," she said, her voice dropping into that smooth, authoritative register she used for closing deals. She didn't look at the menu. She looked at me. "And a Pinot Noir, the Willamette Valley Reserve. She prefers the earth notes over the fruit." The waiter nodded and vanished. I sat there, stunned, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. It wasn't just that she remembered my drink. It was the specificity. She remembered the why. It was a detail she had filed away in the steel trap of her mind, alongside structural load tables and zoning laws. It felt like a caress, intimate and terrifyingly precise. "You remember," I said, the words falling out before I could polish them. "I don't delete data," Elise replied, unbuttoning her damp coat. She revealed the silk blouse underneath, the fabric clinging slightly to her skin. "I just archive it." "Is that what I am?" I asked, leaning forward, the ambient danger of the room making me bold. "Archive data?" "You're a variable," she corrected. "One that's currently disrupting my projections." The drinks arrived. She lifted her glass, the crystal catching the amber light, and took a sip. Her eyes never left mine. The air between us thickened, charged with the alcohol and the sudden lack of professional armor. We started talking about the project, the timeline, the budget, the impossible merger of our styles. But the conversation was a facade. We were moving pieces on a board, but the game wasn't architecture. "Why didn't you call?" she asked suddenly. The question cut through a debate about limestone cladding like a knife. I paused, swirling the wine in my glass. The truth was complicated. "I wanted to," I admitted, staring at the dark red liquid. "But you're you. You're the cover of Architectural Digest. You're the skyline. I was working out of a converted garage, designing coffee shops. I didn't want to be another thing you had to fix." Elise set her glass down. The sound was sharp against the marble table. "I didn't want to fix you," she said, her voice dropping lower, vibrating with a vulnerability I hadn't seen since the breakup. "I wanted the argument. My life is streamlined. It's efficient. It's perfect." She looked around the bar, at the sterile luxury that mirrored her own world. "It's quiet. I miss the noise you make." "You hated the noise," I reminded her. "You said I was chaotic." "I said you were messy," she corrected. "There's a difference. Chaos has energy. Order just has maintenance. She leaned in, crossing the invisible boundary of the table. The scent of sandalwood and rain drifted over me again, stronger now, mixed with the gin. "You think you won by leaving," she said, her gaze dissecting me, unflinching and raw. "You think building your own little firm made you free. But I look at you, and I don't see freedom. I see someone who's tired of holding up the roof alone." "I'm independent," I bristled, though the accusation landed close to the bone. "You're lonely," she countered softly. "Independence is just a pretty word for having no one to catch you when the scaffolding slips." The truth of it hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I wanted to argue, to pull out my profit margins and my design awards, but they felt flimsy against the weight of her attention. She wasn't attacking me. She was seeing me. And God, I had missed being seen. The waiter returned with the bill, breaking the spell. Elise paid with a black card, the transaction seamless and silent. We stood up, the alcohol buzzing pleasantly in my blood, softening the edges of the night. But as we walked out into the lobby, the tension didn't dissipate. It coiled tighter. The night felt unfinished, a sentence cut off before the period. We had the contract, we had the drinks, but we still didn't have the answer to the question the storm had asked us in the trailer. The deadline didn't care about the unfinished conversation in the hotel bar. It didn't care about the humidity in the trailer or the 5 years of silence. It only cared about Monday morning. We left the hotel and took a cab to the Cobalt Tower, ascending in silence to the penthouse floor where Elise's firm occupied the entire expanse. Walking into Elise's office was like walking into the inside of a microchip. It was a fortress of solitude, built from limestone and low iron glass, immaculate and terrifyingly sterile. There were no piles of paper, no coffee rings on the desk, no photos of family or friends. It was impressive, undeniably, but it felt less like a workspace and more like a museum exhibit where the human element had been curated out. The city lights bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished concrete floors. "We need the large table," Elise said, discarding her coat on a Corbusier chair without looking at it. She moved immediately to the drafting station by the north window, her focus shifting instantly from the personal to the professional. "I'll pull up the structural grid. You overlay the aesthetic shell. If we're going to sell this hybrid, the seams have to be invisible." We started working. At first, the air was brittle with tension. We were polite, overly professional, navigating around each other like two satellites terrified of collision. I sketched on vellum. I still needed the friction of graphite on paper to think, while Elise manipulated 3D models on a massive touchscreen surface. The contrast was stark. My messy, organic lines against her glowing, perfect vectors. But as the hours bled into the night, the friction turned into rhythm. We found the old dance. It was a muscle memory we hadn't realized we still shared. I would mutter about a sightline being blocked, and before I could finish the sentence, Elise would rotate the model to reveal the solution. She would tap a load-bearing wall on her screen, and I would instinctively sketch a heavier material to ground it. We stopped speaking in full sentences, trading in a shorthand of nods, hums, and technical jargon that sounded like a secret language. By 2 a.m., the formality had dissolved into the fatigue of creation. The office, once a cold temple, began to feel lived in. Elise had kicked off her heels, padding around the concrete floor in stocking feet, significantly shorter and softer without her armor. I had rolled up the sleeves of my dress, my hair pinned up in a chaotic knot that was slowly unraveling. The air smelled of the strong, dark coffee Elise had brewed and the graphite dust from my sharpener. We ended up leaning over the same drafting table. The digital screen was too small for the scope of the problem, so we had taped my massive drawings down, layering tracing paper over them to work out the joint details. Our shoulders brushed as we leaned in to examine a corner detail. The contact was electric, but neither of us pulled away. We were too tired, too focused. Our breathing synced up, a slow, steady rhythm in the quiet room. I stopped drawing for a moment, just watching her. Elise was frowning at a junction where glass met steel, her lower lip caught between her teeth. I watched the precision of her hands as she made a note in the margin, her handwriting small, architectural, perfect. I felt a surge of the old admiration, that dangerous pull toward her absolute competence. She didn't just solve problems. She dismantled them. "This connection is clumsy," she murmured, frustration tightening her voice. If we bolt the cladding here, we ruin the thermal break. The heat loss will be massive. We can't weld it, I argued, leaning closer, tracing the line with my pencil. If we weld it, we lose the flexibility. The building needs to move, Elise. If it's too rigid, the glass snaps. It won't snap if the geometry is correct, she insisted. You're trying to force a curve where the math wants a straight line. The eye wants a curve, I countered. The math can adjust. Show me, she commanded. Show me how you get the load to transfer without a vertical support. I tried to sketch the cantilever, but my hand was cramping from hours of gripping the pencil, and the line came out shaky. I groaned in frustration, reaching for the eraser. Stop, Elise said. Her voice was right at my ear. She didn't take the pencil from me. Instead, she reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was cool, her palm firm against the back of my hand. She guided my fingers, forcing me to slow down, to stabilize. Relax your grip, she whispered, the directive vibrating against my shoulder. Let the weight of the hand do the work, like this. She moved my hand, and together we drew the line. It was perfect. A smooth, confident arc that transferred the load exactly where it needed to go. The movement was purely technical, a correction of technique, but the intimacy of it was devastating. We froze, staring at the graphite line we had made together. Her hand didn't leave mine. The silence of the room amplified the sound of our breathing, the city lights below acting as the only witnesses to the sudden, terrifying collapse of the distance between us. Her hand remained over mine, a warm weight anchoring me to the table. The pencil had stopped moving, the graphite arc we had drawn together sitting there like a bridge between two islands. The work had slowed, then stopped entirely, suffocated by the sudden, overwhelming awareness of proximity. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a stark, living contrast to the air-conditioned chill of the glass box we were standing in. Elise slowly withdrew her hand, but she didn't step back. She stayed in my space, her breathing matching the erratic, shallow rhythm of my own. She looked down at the drawing, tracing the line with her eyes, before finally looking up at me. Her gaze was dark, unreadable, stripped of the professional detachment she wore like armor. Your passion, she said quietly, her voice rougher than usual, lacking its polished sheen. It was always your greatest asset. And your most dangerous liability. Is that why you cut me loose? I asked, the words leaving my mouth before I could check them for safety. The question had sat in my throat for 5 years like a stone. Because I was a liability? Because you were a variable I couldn't control, she corrected. She leaned back against the edge of the drafting table, crossing her arms, but the defensive posture looked fragile now, like a wall bracing against a flood. You brought chaos into the system. You made me question the math, and I require order. I looked around the room, the pristine glass, the cold steel, the breathtaking view of a city that didn't care about us. It was perfect. It was impressive. It was dead. And look at where order got you, I said, my voice rising, challenging the silence of the room. You have the biggest firm in the city. You have the view. You have the precision. But are you happy, Elise? In this glass tower, with your perfect lines and your silence? Is it enough? Elise flinched. It was microscopic, a tiny tightening of the jaw, but I saw it. She looked out the window, avoiding my gaze for the first time all night, staring at the reflection of the room rather than the city beyond. I built this, she said, her voice barely a whisper, to prove that I didn't need anyone, to prove that I could stand on my own structure without needing a counterweight. I wanted to be untouchable. You succeeded, I said softly, stepping closer. You're untouchable. She turned back to me then, and the mask was gone. In its place was a raw, terrifying hunger that mirrored my own. That's the problem, she admitted. I don't want to be untouchable. Not tonight. The distance between us vanished. I didn't see who moved first. Maybe it was gravity. Maybe it was just the inevitable collapse of the walls we'd spent all night trying to reinforce. Her hand found my waist, pulling me in with a strength that stole my breath. My hands found the silk of her blouse, the warmth of her neck. The kiss wasn't frantic. It wasn't the messy, desperate collision of our younger years. It was heavy. It was deliberate. It was a reclaiming. Her lips moved against mine with the same exacting precision she applied to everything. But there was a desperate heat underneath it, a demand to be felt. It tasted like coffee and wine and the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. I made a sound, low in my throat, and she responded by tightening her grip, pressing me back against the drafting table. The edge of the wood dug into my hip, grounding me as the world narrowed down to the sensation of her. The scent of her, sandalwood and cold rain, flooded my senses, drowning out the smell of graphite and ozone. Her thumb traced the line of my jaw, a possessive, reverent touch that mapped the changes 5 years had made. "You're still messy," she murmured against my mouth, but it sounded like a prayer. "And you're still controlling," I whispered back, my hands tangling in her hair, ruining the perfect blowout. "Someone has to be," she breathed, and then she kissed me again, deeper this time, erasing the argument. For a long time, there was only the sound of our breathing and the shifting of fabric. We were rewriting the blueprint of us, finding the structural flaws and realizing they were actually load-bearing walls. The precision of her touch, the way her hands knew exactly where to hold me to keep me from falling, was the answer I hadn't known I was looking for. Slowly, the darkness outside began to thin. The deep indigo of the night gave way to a bruised, steely gray. The light bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, cold and unforgiving, illuminating the scattered sketches and the tangle of our bodies. The city was waking up. Reality was creeping back in with the dawn, turning the magic of the night back into the hard logic of the day. The gray light of dawn wasn't romantic. It was clinical. It washed over the penthouse office, illuminating the smudge of graphite on my cheek and the wrinkle in my dress. I sat up on the leather sofa, feeling the stiffness in my neck and the sudden crushing weight of reality. The merger wasn't just a contract on a table anymore. It was this. My messy, vulnerable self, waking up inside the fortress of the woman who had already broken me once. Elise was already standing by the window. She was fully dressed, her blouse tucked in with military precision, her hair smoothed back into its signature sleek style. She looked like she hadn't just spent the last 4 hours unraveling in my arms. She looked like a CEO. She looked like a rival. "Coffee," she said, not turning around. She set a cup on the desk, black, precise, terrifyingly normal. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. The intimacy of the night before felt like a fever dream. In the cold light of day, it looked like a tactical error. I had slept with the competition. Was this just a nostalgia trip for her? A way to scratch an itch before she went back to her perfect, sterile life? "We need to prep for the 9 a.m., I said, my voice sounding thin. "Sterling expects a unified front." "We have a unified front," Elise said, turning finally. Her face was unreadable. The raw hunger was gone, replaced by the cool calculation that built skyscrapers. "The drawings are done. The logic holds." Then the phone on her desk buzzed. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the fragile morning truce. Elise picked it up, her expression tightening instantly. "Sterling," she said. She listened, her eyes flicking to me, then away. "I see. A 20% reduction? That compromises the structural integrity of the atrium." "No, I understand the liquidity issue. We can look at the material costs." My stomach dropped. 20%. That was the death knell for my design. My reclaimed wood, the copper panels, they were the first things to go when the budget bled. The soul was expensive. Concrete and glass were cheap. Elise hung up. The silence was suffocating. "He wants to cut the budget," she said flatly. "He's getting cold feet about the experimental aspects. He wants to revert to the standard glazing." "He wants my part gone," I translated, stepping back. "And you're going to give it to him. It's the logical move, isn't it? Cut the variable, save the contract." I grabbed my portfolio. The instinct to run was overwhelming. I needed to leave before she did it, before she looked at me with that pitying, pragmatic expression and told me that business was business. I couldn't handle the rejection twice. "I'll save you the trouble," I said, heading for the door. "Tell him I walked. Tell him my vision was incompatible. You get the fee, you get the building. You win, Elise. You always win." "Stop," she said. It wasn't a shout, but it had the weight of a command. I froze with my hand on the glass door handle. "I'm not doing this again," I whispered. "I'm not going to stand here while you dismantle me to fit your grid." "I didn't say I agreed to the cut," she said. Her footsteps clicked on the concrete, coming closer. "I said he wants it. I didn't say he gets it." I turned slowly. She was standing 5 feet away, the morning light framing her like a halo of cold fire. She looked tired, finally. The mask slipped just enough to show the fear underneath. "You think I brought you back here just to cut you loose?" she asked, her voice low. "You think last night was, what, a strategy? Wasn't it?" I challenged. "You need the contract." "I need the building to stand up," she said, stepping into my space. "And I realized last night that it doesn't stand up without your chaotic, expensive, impossible copper panels. The math doesn't work without the weight." She reached out, her hand hovering near my arm but not touching. "I'm not cutting you. I'm doubling down. But I need you to stay in the room. I can't fight for your vision if you're halfway to the elevator." The admission hung in the air. She wasn't just talking about the architecture. She was talking about the spine of us. "We're going to be late," she added, the practical CEO overlay sliding back into place. I let out a breath I'd been holding for 5 years. "I need a shower," I said. "And a better coffee." "There's a shower in the executive suite," she said, turning back to her desk. "And the coffee is excellent." The drive to the client's office was quiet. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with decision. We watched the city roll by, the skyline we were about to alter, knowing the real renovation had already happened in the dark. The elevator ride up was silent, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of yesterday. It was the quiet of a coiled spring. We walked back into the boardroom, the scene of our initial war, and took our seats on the same side of the table this time. Mr. Sterling sat opposite us, his finger tapping rhythmically on the budget spreadsheet. He looked like a man ready to perform surgery. Quick, painful, and necessary. "It's a beautiful concept," Sterling started, leaning back. "Truly. The merger of styles is provocative. But the numbers don't support the poetry. The copper cladding, the reclaimed timber atrium, the baffled intake system, it pushes us 20% over. I'm approving the structural footprint, Ms. Thorne, but the aesthetic overlay needs to be value engineered out. We'll go with standard aluminum composite and forced air." He looked at Elise, expecting the nod. He expected the CEO, who valued the bottom line above all else, to agree that poetry was too expensive. He expected the rival to cut the upstart loose to save the hull. I felt my breath hitch. This was the moment. The old Elise would have calculated the risk, seen the profit margin, and agreed. She would have called it pragmatism and told me to grow up. Elise stood up. She didn't look at Sterling. She walked to the window, looking out at the skyline she had helped build. "You're right about the upfront cost," she said, her voice cool and detached. "Standard aluminum is cheaper today. But you're wrong about the value." She turned, placing her hands on the table, leaning in with that terrifying focus. "If we strip the copper and the timber, we lose the thermal mass efficiency I calculated last night. The building becomes a glass box. Your HVAC costs will triple in 10 years. You'll save money on construction and lose it on operation." Sterling blinked. He hadn't expected math. He certainly hadn't expected her to weaponize it against him. "And beyond the utilities," Elise continued, her eyes sliding briefly to mine, dark and unreadable. "You asked for a landmark. Landmarks aren't built on compromise. If you value engineer the soul out of this building, you aren't building the Ares project. You're building an office park. And my firm doesn't put its name on office parks." My heart hammered against my ribs. She wasn't just defending the design. She was defending me. She was using her reputation, her obsession with precision, to protect the chaos I brought to the table. She was proving that she finally understood that some things couldn't be quantified, but they still counted. She was using her power to protect, not to control. "We don't separate the systems," I added, stepping in seamlessly. The rhythm from the night before flooded back, effortless and electric. "The copper isn't decoration, Mr. Sterling. It's the skin. It breathes. If you remove it, the organism dies." I pulled up the rendering, the one we had finalized at 4 a.m. It showed the building at dusk, the warm glow of the wood interior radiating through the glass, the copper catching the last light of the day. It looked alive. "Miss Thorne manages the skeleton," I said, looking at Elise. "And Miss Vance manages the pulse," Elise finished, her voice steady. We presented the rest of the proposal as a single unit. There was no my part or her part. There was just the building. We moved around the table like satellites in a binary orbit, distinct but inseparable. When I explained the flow of movement through the lobby, Elise chimed in with the load distribution that made that open space possible. When she detailed the wind resistance of the upper floors, I explained how that resistance created the acoustic quiet in the penthouse. We were finishing each other's thoughts, answering questions before Sterling could fully ask them. The chemistry in the room was palpable, a mix of professional brilliance and the undeniable electric tension of two people who knew each other's minds as intimately as their bodies. Sterling watched us, his skepticism slowly dissolving into fascination. He wasn't just buying a building anymore. He was buying the energy in the room. He was buying the storm we had weathered to get here. When we finished, the room was silent. The rendering hovered on the screen, a testament to what happens when order meets chaos and decides to dance instead of fight. Sterling looked at the budget, then at the rendering, then at us. He closed the folder. "It's expensive," he said, finally. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "But I suppose the best things usually are." He stood up and extended his hand. "Build it. Exactly like this." The applause that followed was internal, a quiet thunder in my own chest. We walked out of the boardroom and into the elevator, the silence ringing in our ears like the aftermath of an explosion. The descent was smooth, 50 floors dropping away in seconds, but my stomach remained somewhere near the penthouse. We had won. The Ares project was ours. But as the doors slid open to the cavernous, marble-clad lobby, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a terrifying clarity. The war was over. The project was secured. But the question that had been hovering since the rainstorm in the trailer was standing right there in the atrium light. What happens to the architects? Elise didn't walk immediately to the exit. She stopped near the security desk, turning to face me. The morning light filtered through the glass revolving doors, catching the sharp line of her collar. She looked impeccable again, the CEO armor back in place. But I knew what the skin felt like underneath the silk. I knew the hesitation in her breath. "So," I said, clutching my portfolio like a shield, "we build it. I'll have my team send over the revised schematics by Tuesday. We can coordinate the—" "Stop," Elise said. She took a step closer, ignoring the bustle of suits and couriers around us. "Don't go back to the garage, Sarah." The use of my first name, spoken with that quiet intensity, stopped me cold. "It's a studio, Elise. It has big windows and soul." "It has a draft and bad lighting," she countered. "And it's safe. You just proved in there that you're capable of more than safety." She looked at the floor for a second, a rare hesitation, before meeting my eyes. "I don't want to coordinate with you via email. I don't want to fight you for territory every Tuesday morning. I don't want to wait for a site visit to smell your perfume." "What do you want?" I asked, though I suspected the answer terrified me. "A merger," she said, "not a takeover. A partnership, 50-50. Your name on the door next to mine. Thorne and Vance." I laughed, a short, breathless sound. "You? Sharing the letterhead? You hate sharing." "I hate incompetence," she corrected. "I hate disorder. But I realized something last night, watching you fix the curve I couldn't see." She reached out, her fingers brushing the sleeve of my coat, a public claim that felt more significant than the contract we just won. "I have enough precision. I have enough order. I'm drowning in it. I need your chaos. I need the friction. The building doesn't stand up without the counterweight." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the woman who had taught me how to draw a straight line, and the woman who had let me guide her hand when the line needed to bend. I thought about my quiet studio, my total control, my safe, lonely independence. Then I thought about the electricity of the last 12 hours. The arguments, the collaboration, the heat of her skin against mine. "It will be a disaster," I whispered. "We'll fight every day. I'll leave coffee cups on your limestone desk. You'll critique my handwriting." "Likely," she agreed, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "But we'll build things no one else can touch." The revolving doors spun, spitting people out into the city. I realized I didn't want to walk out those doors alone. I didn't want to be the solo artist anymore. I wanted the tension. I wanted the challenge. "Thorne and Vance." I tested the sound of it. It sounded heavy. It sounded permanent. "Vance and Thorne," she offered. "Alphabetical order is more efficient." I smiled. "Deal." We walked out of the building together. The air outside was crisp, the storm having scrubbed the sky clean. The city looked different now. It wasn't a grid of obstacles or a fortress to be stormed. It was a canvas, The noise of the traffic, the wind between the skyscrapers, the sheer scale of it all. It didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt like potential. I fell into step beside her, our strides matching naturally. I was risking everything, my autonomy, my heart, my sanity, on a woman who treated love like a structural equation. Elise opened the back door of the town car, but paused, looking at me. Ready? Always, I said, as her hand found mine in the cool leather interior, fingers interlacing with a grip that promised to hold the weight. I knew the math was sound. The strongest structures aren't the rigid ones. They're the ones built on tension, balance, and the courage to lean in. If you've ever found your perfect balance in the last place you looked, subscribe for more stories. Until next time, keep building.